So I'm thrilled to be here with Tom Zschach, who I've known for many years now. One of the most insightful people that I've met in the capital markets, always seeing what's around the next corner. So I'm really thrilled to be here with all of you to discuss with him, so he can share your insights with all of you, as well as me. So Tom, thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. I was going to say the same thing about you.
Well,
You're one of the guys that always has the insight and has a good idea of where the market's going. So.
Thank you. Thank you. I spend a lot of time thinking about it. A lot of time. As I'm sure you do too.
Indeed.
So, you know, we have some key topics we want to cover that we think will be good to discuss. So what do you think, Tom, is the driving force for global finance to have such an interest level in digital assets, right? There's this very large interest now that's grown very rapidly in global finance. What do you think is driving that?
And you're right. I mean, the whole environment's really changed, you know, in the last year or so, not even a year. And if you think about, you know, other initiatives that were out there, and going, you know, pick your time frame if you want to say 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 2019 or even before that. To me, the main catalyst is getting regulatory clarity about what crypto is, what a digital asset is, what's acceptable, how they're going to be treated. And I think when you have that clarity and you mix into that the technical standards and foundations, you really have something to work with. And so I think part of it is kind of the change of administration and the evolving regulatory environment that we've seen with the passage of the Genius Act. But I think the other part of the story is then how does the rest of the world respond to that? Right, the world's a big place. I've just spent the last 2 weeks traveling in Europe, in Basel, and in Saudi Arabia and Dubai. And so one is kind of the catalyst here, but two is, you know, how are people going to respond to that, and what kind of actually works for them, and what kind of, you know, similar or not so similar regulation are you going to see in place. But I think it's really grounded on the fact that you have a regulatory base, you have a legal framework to work with, and that's what, you know, traditional finance markets need as a foundation to build on top of.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think the legal foundation was the missing piece.
Yeah.
I think there was a long time where people were talking about how all crypto, all blockchain technology was going to be regulated out of existence.
Yeah.
That's a common rebuttal that I always heard for many years. You know, how the industry is not going to exist because, you know, the legal system will essentially make it impossible. So, you know, that has gone away. That possibility is gone. And you're right that the U.S. shift has been massive. I think those places that you mentioned, Switzerland, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia you mentioned, but, you know, the Emirates are right there. I'm sure you were there too.
Yeah.
I think they've already been very pro-crypto, but they've had to exist within their own relatively small ecosystems. And it's been difficult for them to get volume, and it's been difficult for them to get transactions off the ground. But because the US has the biggest, most robust financial system, I think getting really good transaction volume in the US system is a lot easier than getting really good volume and success in those systems. And so I think now, if you get the US system to transact even at the percentage level that you have in those places, all of a sudden the whole industry has exploded, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the U.S. has been a catalyst, but you know, the part B to the question here is really from customer demand, right? So now that you have the clarity and you have new forms of value, and I think, you know, from where we sit and what we hear from our customers, we're agnostic to the creation of any digital asset. I mean, we're focused on legal assets, right, in the eyes of a regulator and the law. So sometimes, you know, the term crypto kind of gets used pretty loosely. But when you talk about a stable coin or tokenized deposit or central bank digital currency, we're completely agnostic to that. You know, we're a co-op that's there to service our customers and to help them service their customers. And so we're agnostic. We don't have an advocacy position on any of new creation or adoption or driving digital assets. The question is, you know, for our customers, what do we need to do for you to help you build services and to actually allow you to differentiate yourself and to service your customers better. And that's really what we're seeing. The second part of the answer is we see the demand from the customers.
You see that growth in demand.
Yeah, and on the innovation kind of arc, when people know something's possible, they spend a lot more time and a lot more energy on it. But like you said, if there was, bad news or people weren't quite sure, hey, we're not really going to move on this because there's uncertainty. Whether it's good uncertainty or bad uncertainty, but markets need certainty. And when they see that and they go, okay, now that exists, now I got something to work with. Now I'm going to spend some cycles on research. Now I'm going to spend some time thinking about, new models for liquidity. And so, I wouldn't say that's the complete flywheel, but it definitely helps pick up momentum.
Yeah. I'm also seeing the growth in demand. I'm definitely seeing the legal certainty having a big effect.
Yeah.
I agree with you that standards are very necessary, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about.
Yeah.
So it's really a unique, I would say it's a unique time. You and me have both been in the industry for many years.
Yeah.
We've never seen it at this unique stage.
We've worked together for many years, right? We've had talked a lot of conversations about, where things are going, how it would work, but you need the kind of the basic foundations to be able to do that. And I think we have that in place now where we can kind of move beyond experiments and kind of guessing what the future might be and actually start to put things in action.
Absolutely. That's what I'm seeing. And I know we've said that before, and our industry has been very hopeful about that. I think people have become a little desensitized because they're like, oh, okay, this is the year.
Yeah, history is littered with lousy predictions, right? I mean,
I think this is the year. Up until November of every year, this is the year. So now it's September. This is the year. This is it.
You want to be more specific, like November 15th, or you pick a date?
Thanksgiving.
There you go. Okay, good.
Thanksgiving.
We could have a lot to be thankful for. So that's
yeah.
great.
I'm very thankful for this and that. And next year is the year that the blockchain is in the capital markets. So, just a fair warning to everybody about my predictions. I've been predicting that for 5 years now, I think, at least publicly, more privately. So, the topic that's really come up now as a key topic for success in the blockchain industry is interoperability. Different versions and concepts of traditional system interoperability, cross-chain interoperability, all kinds of interoperability ideas. How do you view these interoperability ideas? What is their importance? How do you see them?
I mean, that's really been kind of the anchor of what we do and the value that we've added for now 50 years, right? We had our 50th birthday last year. And it's based on interoperability. And Swift literally started because domestic payment systems couldn't speak to each other. Right, so you need to have some kind of intermediary, and you need to have some way to transact and credit an account for a payment, outside of the country. And so that's just kind of been the heart of what we have done from the beginning of time. And it even becomes more important now because one of the things that we see in the marketplace is nothing's getting turned off. Somebody doesn't launch a new payment service or a new instant payment service. Nothing gets turned off. Right, the world just seems to get more complicated in terms of participants, in terms of places you can settle, in terms of new assets, new forms of value, right, tokenized or not, and so we're just kind of adding to that stack. So I could make the argument that interoperability becomes even more important. I don't buy the parallel universe argument. It's we're just going to have traditional finance until the blockchain world comes in and takes over. I can't see that. I mean, the arc on this thing is pretty significant, right? And the infrastructure is important. It's not the kind of thing that's going to change overnight. So you might see excelled efforts in terms of new forms of value and new ways to transfer, new networks to connect to, but there's still a lot of existing infrastructure that's going to be in place, I think, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I kind of see two versions of interoperability. I see interoperability between existing systems and blockchains, which is the type of interoperability that you just described, where how do we make an existing system, a data system, a payment system, a messaging system, an identity system, how do those systems interoperate with blockchains in a way that those systems can deliver their value, their unique value, while blockchains deliver their unique value?
Yeah.
And how does the relationship between those systems become really reliable and unquestionable, right? So just like, if you were to rely just on the first system, adding a blockchain to that first system, adding that second blockchain system doesn't add more risk, right? It becomes pretty seamless. That if you do a payment on the SWIFT network, the SWIFT network payment will result in a blockchain settlement that you paid for that asset, but that asset's on a blockchain, right? And that's a guaranteed event. And then the second one is this multi-chain future that you and me have discussed and heard a lot about and hearing more and more about. And I actually think that the multi-chain future will be related to the traditional financial rails, because the traditional financial rails will need to execute things on multiple chains, right? But the multi-chain future interoperability question is what most people in Web3 think about when they think about interoperability. But I think there is really these two levels. Do you see those two levels? Do you see more, or how do you see?
I do. I mean, one thing to kind of build on top with interoperability, because we always talk about the technical aspect of it. But one of the benefits you have in transacting on the SWIFT network is a rule book, right? So you can imagine making a payment. You're a large corporation. You're making a payment from one country to another country cross-border, and you have a problem. You have a dispute. You know, if every one of those transactions didn't have a rule book and didn't have a way to do things like dispute resolution, didn't have a definition of who's liable for what, I mean, the courts could be packed with those disputes. And then, you know, if a corporation from the US is sending money to Singapore, it's like, now we have a dispute. So the first question is, which court do you go to? Do you go to Singapore or do you go to US? So we talk a lot about technical interoperability, but one of the advantages you have on the network as well, and there's a lot of advantages to it, is you have a rule book and you have rules of engagement and you have definitions, you know, by jurisdiction of what legal settlement means. And yes, that could happen, you know, on a blockchain. That could happen on other traditional rails, but you need that kind of certainty. And the institutional market is very, very different than the retail market. And I'm not saying that doesn't matter in the retail market, but when you're sending $200 million, you know, and you're going to hit, you know, the equivalent of pressing send on that, you need to have certainty in that. And you need to know that if something goes wrong, what's going to happen? You know, we don't design market infrastructure for regular days where everything works well. We design what we do to be resilient. We design things for bad days. You know, the way that, you know, that these systems are overseen, or they're for the bad days, right? For when the market's not doing exactly what we expected it to do, or you have an aberration in terms of a risk. That's what these are designed for. So we got to think about kind of the non-technical issues beyond the interoperability. I think on the chains, you know this, you know, probably better than most, they're not all created equally, right? So when somebody says that's on chain, that's safe, it's like, really? Like, tell me more. Tell me more about that, right? Tell me about their uptime. You know, tell me about the number of validators they have. You know, tell me about their track record. You know, all of those things really, really matter. You know, in systemic important market infrastructure, and we're nowhere near that in terms of scale and kind of doing things like settlement on chain. But, you know, they need to work every day. You can just say, we had a bad day, we'll be back up on Monday. It doesn't work like that, right? So there's actually a lot that goes into this, into the interoperability. And again, the focus has to be on the bad days, and the comfort has to be, it's going to be resilient, and there's backups, and that's been tested, and it's a well understood operation inside of the market.
Yeah, that's exactly our point of view.
Yeah.
I think that's actually probably the main reason that Chainlink has become so popular in DeFi and in the places where it's widely used. It's because you have those 363 days when everything is easy, and anyone can build a system for the 363 days, and they can call it whatever they want, and they can say whatever they want about it. But then there's the 2 days where everything goes bonkers.
Yeah.
And Chainlink has consistently delivered data on chain when other systems failed, has consistently done transactions between chains when other systems failed. Yeah, you're absolutely right. For people that actually do risk assessment and actually have risk ratings and actually look at uptime and actually look at these security dimensions, the SWIFT network has distinguished itself as the most reliable mechanism, I think maybe even in history, for transferring large amounts of value over the last 50 years, you know, which is why it's the SWIFT network. And so that's a very good, I would say, role model to aspire to from our point of view, exactly with the mindset you just said. So you literally just said what we say internally of what we're building Chainlink for.
It's a good principle.
Yeah, it's the right principle, absolutely. And so likewise, we have all the backups and edge case handling and all this stuff. So let's talk more about Swift and interoperability. How does Swift relate to interoperability? How do you see it contributing and working on interoperability to benefit the Swift community in the blockchain context? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's a pretty broad term, right? And so I think it really comes down to individual use cases. And I think one of the measurements you look at is like who's actually using it, and can you do it at scale, right? It's one thing to do an experiment and you know what I call kind of onesies and twosies. It's another thing to actually do it at scale, you know, as a defined market practice that can be done in, you know, dozens of countries, you know, kind of simultaneously. So I think it comes down to what use case you're talking about. I think it's really important in those use cases, you know, what are you actually connecting, right? We've done we started doing experiments probably almost 4 years ago now about interoperability based on central bank digital currencies, right? Because that's what we did, and that's going to be an important constituency for national currencies, of course. Digital form of a national currency is something that's obviously important to our community, our customers, our banks, and everybody else. So we thought that was a good place to start and focus our efforts. You know, we've done work, you know, past that on a token. You know, I would say probably 3 years ago, nobody thought about the fact that you could actually carry an ERC20 token or equivalent on the Swift network. Issue, transfer, redeem, burn, right? And be able to kind of instruct money to be moved between money management firms, for example, right? So it really comes down to the use case. It really comes down to what exactly are we connecting? Is it something that's here in standard and very kind of mature and used, or is it a new way of doing things, right? Is a new type of asset on a new chain? And so I think it really, you know, this is one of those things where the devil's kind of really in the details. And the question is, how do we work with our banks and our Swift community to really try to highlight the value? And I think this is important. I'm sure you're going to get to this at some point, but we need to kind of highlight the value. It's you know, we're beyond technical feasibility. We're beyond, you know, kind of the use cases here. We're beyond experiments, right? I saw a number the other day that said there's $100 billion of value, you know, mostly stable coins on Ethereum today. Now that's, you know, in the scheme of finance, that's not a large percentage of value, but $100 billion is a real number, right? So we're past kind of POCs and experiments. And we're into the point now, which is what steps do we actually have to take to be able to do this at scale, right? And again, it doesn't really matter if it's a tokenized deposit or CBDC or stable coin or a tokenized money market fund. The question is, how do you get to scale and what's still required to do that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we've done great work together with UBS and other large banks, and I think that's a good step.
It seems like a long time ago, right? Because we announced that at the Singapore FinTech Festival last year, so. Time flies.
Yeah, that was a positive development, but I think you're right. That's still in the onesie twosie category, and I think now we're all looking to go to the scale version of the world because that's where the market wants to be, right? So I think there's enough market demand now to go past, you know, the onesie twosie stage, as you put it, and go to the scale version of the market to deliver value at scale. Does that sound right to you?
It does, and that's where I think there's still some fundamental things that need to get worked out to get there. I think there is positive momentum. I think there's a lot of, you know, clever people trying to figure out how to capture that value. One of the ones that I've written about this, you know, recently for people that read my blogs and that sort of thing, but this idea of settlement on a ledger versus legal settlement. You know, settlement in traditional finance is a legal construct. It's not a technical construct, right? There's very, very clear definitions about what that means. Sometimes that differs per jurisdiction, per country, but it's a legal construct, right? It has to be able to hold up in court. It has to be something that's agreed upon by the jurisdiction, and it does get complicated. But that settlement aspect needs to be kind of more broadly accepted. I think standards are a big part of that. I don't think anybody thinks we're going to be able to get to scale without standards. You know, this is going to be the third year now. You've been working with our team on this as well, to help define the standards that can be used across all the different institutions, right? If everybody literally speaks a different language or, you know, has different kinds of translations, you know, whether it's part of the pre-validation check, whether it's kind of the compliance field that's required, whether it's kind of the richer data that we're getting ISO 2022, it all needs to be standardized. I would argue that's not just good for the Swift network and the Swift community. That's also good for fintechs that want to build products that complement and want to sell into banks, right? So those kind of standards are super valuable, not just for the people who are operating on the network today, but the people who want to actually continue to add to the ecosystem. They know how to do it. They can speak the same language. So I think there are a number of things that still need to get worked out. I think there's some really good test cases that are coming up in that respect. I think we all are pretty comfortable we're going to live in a multi-chain world. And it's kind of hard to think that we would, this is what you do, right? Which is collect chains together. So I know I don't have to convince you.
No need to convince me.
We're going to live in a multi-chain world. We're going to live in a world where everything in finance today is based on trust. Mm-hmm. And it's based on trust. And some of that's by regulation, some of that's by technology, some of that's by experience, some of that's by validated services, right? So some of the work you've done on verified data to bring that on chain, right? And again, it has to be, you have to have permission to do that, and it can't violate PII principles and all those kind of things. But the idea of having a trusted data source is hugely important. Like how are you going to do agentic AI? Let's take a step back, right? How are you going to do agentic AI, which actually triggers a payment transaction or settlement transaction or a compliance workflow? How do you do that without a trusted data source, a verified trusted data source? We know you can't. It's actually not possible, right? So some of the foundations, we talk a lot about interoperability, but some of the foundations you're building, I think, are absolutely essential. Again, if you want to have trust in these systems, everything in finance is about trust. When I buy a car and I take a loan out from my bank, which I would never do, but let's just say I took out a loan to buy a car, the bank trusts that I'm going to pay them back. When I use my credit card, the bank trusts that I'm going to pay at least my minimum payment by the end of the month, right? Everything's based on trust. There's bad actors and there's people who don't do that, but that's a very small percentage of the overall market. So anything that can help enhance trust and be able to do that and be able to help financial institutions and banks verify that is hugely valuable, right? And it's kind of hard to see how you can move forward at scale without those kind of foundations and capabilities.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think you definitely need the legal foundation. That's one level of reliability that institutions simply cannot do anything without. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
Then I agree with you that standards are very underestimated and misunderstood. I realized a few years ago that I am what's known as a standards geek.
Nobody's ever referred to me as that. I'm just saying.
I think everyone at Swift is a standards geek, by the way. Yeah, so I absolutely agree on the legal. The standards, I think it's highly underestimated. Our industry needs standards for sure. There's this huge fragmentation between chains, between asset types. There's some great standards starting to emerge, like 3643 for tokenization. Mm-hmm. Chainlink is viewed as a standard for validating data, for connecting chains. I think the existing standards, like the Swift ISO 20022 standard, which now, thanks to our great work together, now has blockchain components to it and sections of the standard related to blockchain transactions. That's very exciting. And I do think that the ISO 20022 standard and Swift messages are basically the building blocks of a shared language in the current financial system. And I don't see any reason that shared language can't speak to blockchains, right? So that's kind of a core foundational idea that I think we've been working on and thinking about for a while. Another thing that I found very interesting as I delve deeper into Swift and how it works is actually two things. One thing is the privacy that Swift creates for transactions.
Yeah.
So the ability for you and me to do pre-trade, the ability for you and me to verify things, and for us to do it cryptographically inside the Swift network, and then provide that back to a blockchain through a system like Chainlink to prove to the blockchain that pre-trade step has happened. But the pre-trade step or the private identity information step happens in a private place, right? And that privacy has been really lacking. And I think Swift can provide that. And then the other thing that I found really interesting and still find really interesting is the governance model of Swift. Mm-hmm. Because in an institutional world, and actually even in the blockchain world, if you don't have good governance, that creates its own reliability issues and the credibility issues. And so I don't think people fully understand or appreciate the member-based, voting-based, transaction volume-based method of governance that Swift has, which is actually very unique and interesting. So the Swift members get their voting weight from their usage of the Swift network by transaction volume. And then that's recalculated on a certain period, which is pretty unique and I think creates a unique, really reliable form of governance where people are invested in the network, and if they stop using the network, they don't get to govern it. So I think Swift actually has a lot to offer the institutional world and the blockchain world in general. We just have to get it to a place where it can reliably offer that to that world in a technical sense. And I completely agree with you that being able to create a validated connection and to properly validate and guarantee the relationship between the Swift system and the blockchain systems is a very useful and worthwhile thing to make.
One of the ways I think about public blockchains is it's public shared infrastructure, right? Is really what it is. And I wrote a blog, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks ago, and I said everybody wants to use public shared infrastructure, but nobody wants to see their salary online, right? It's like, hey, it's great. There's a lot of advantages to public infrastructure. I mean, the internet's kind of the ultimate example of that, right? Everybody wants to use public shared infrastructure. Why would a company want to build and run and maintain all that? Why would somebody want to trust something that's maybe held by one company as opposed to, an ecosystem that's not owned by anybody? And so, I, in a lot of ways, I think of it as public shared infrastructure. And I think I'm glad you raised the governance point, because it is different. And when people say to me, "Oh, the code is the governance," I think we might get there, but it's not today, right? Governance today still requires people. It still requires them getting together and making decisions. It still requires, having the clarity around regulation and law that we talked about before. It requires technology to enforce part of that. So this whole idea that the governance is the code, and the code's kind of the end all keep all, we're not there yet, right? And I think there's an important role for Swift to play in that, as we kind of move into the digital asset world, right? And to keep that governance really sound, to keep it trusted, to make sure it actually represents the people that are on the network, right? So they're kind of the principles are aligned, but they're implemented in different ways, right? And we're going to kind of live in this hybrid world for some time.
Absolutely, and I think good standards require good governance, and that's one of the reasons the Swift standards have been so successful.
Yeah.
That people don't fully get is the fact that the governance is very inclusive and very structured, and actually gets a standard that the market wants, which is once again another thing I think the Chainlink system can learn from how Swift works.
I was just going to follow up on the privacy point as well, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, right? Can you use a public blockchain as a notary, right? And could you put the proofs that would, in terms of the transaction happens and the proofs that would be required, KYC or compliance, and actually write that on a public blockchain that everybody can see, whether it's somebody who's regulating and overseeing it, or actually somebody who's involved in the transaction? I think the answer is yes.
It's yes.
We can definitely do that, right?
We're doing it. We can do it.
You can definitely do it. So I knew you were going to say that. But
I knew you knew I was
the question is, and in finance, there's things that you can't write on a public blockchain, right? You can't write, in some jurisdictions it's illegal. You can't write private information on a public blockchain because everybody can get to it. If you're a big bank, you probably don't want the actual amount of the payment that you just made, written on a blockchain. One of the most sacred things for us at Swift is the privacy of our data. I mean, it's without question, the highest priority for us is always the privacy and keeping that trust that we've earned from our community, from our banks, the financial institutions on that data, right? It's absolutely sacred. We'd never jeopardize that. It doesn't matter how good the feature is or how functional, how much it would help financial services. That's never being compromised, is never considered, and it's never going to change, right? So the privacy thing is kind of built into what we do. And it's a really important aspect, especially in financial services. There's other industries like healthcare and stuff where it's probably equally important, but in financial services, it's a must. It's not a nice to have.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It's something I've seen as a really big piece of value that the SWIFT system can provide. We've already built flows with you where private information is transmitted over the SWIFT network in messages, in existing pre-trade flows, MT501, 502, 503, all these message type. And then that private part of the transaction triggers the public part of the transaction, which is the on-chain asset settlement, which to your point can be appended with identity proofs, all kinds of proofs that the regulator and the counterparties can still look at and say, okay, I know that this transaction meets all my requirements, but I can do the private part of it over in the SWIFT system, which I know, can keep things private. So I think it's really combining the two systems. And so I think we've been working on that for many years now, together with you and various teams inside of SWIFT and the SWIFT community. How have you seen that going? How has it been working, with the Chainlink community and the Chainlink system from your point of view, from the SWIFT community's point of view? How has that been going from your view?
I mean, we've published a lot of those results, right? We've been pretty vocal about it and the experiments that we're doing and what we're trying to prove. I think there's a really kind of healthy tension that comes from this as well, right? Because we're not in a position where, I would say in a way we're kind of humble in terms of how we think about it. In certain ways, we have a lot of expertise and we've done things very, very well for a long time. And it's kind of in our DNA in terms of how we do things and how we think about things and the quality that we know is expected from us, from our community. But having this, the kind of the work that we do with you, the new ideas and how, what things could be done and how would you do that? And how do you take a pragmatic approach? Like, how do we make sure that we leverage what is really useful and helpful and works well today and extend that into, new digital assets, new settlement venues, new kind of ways of doing things. And so I think it's really positive. I think there's a really kind of positive tension that comes with that in terms of, hey, we know how it works. We've done this for a long time. These are the things that we can't trade. And these are the kind of principles that aren't movable. And then, hey, the world's coming at you. Our customer demand's coming at us. New assets, the things we were talking about in the top of the talk here, they're all coming at us. So how do we respond to that? And how do we do that in a way that we don't compromise what we are? I mean, the way that we're looking at digital assets now, we're not going to change who, where, and what we do. We don't issue tokens. We don't issue money. We're not custodians. We don't do settlement. Right? Actually, all the people connected to our network do that, but we don't do those things. Right? And so, for us, it's like, how do we extend what we've done really well? And then, but also, how do we take advantage of what's out there and how do we satisfy the customer demand? And I think the work that we do and the partnership we have together really helps us. We do that with a lot of partners, right? I mean, you guys are good, been working with us for a long time, but there's always something that we can learn and we shouldn't try to build everything ourselves. And I think we're kind of humble enough to know that and know and really appreciate the help.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. Me and our team have learned a lot about the SWIFT standard and the SWIFT community, which is the largest bank community out there. This year, again, we're going to be at Sibos and be a big part of the SWIFT community and the SWIFT event. It's always a great event. I think this is the sixth or maybe even seventh Sibos I've ever been to.
Yeah, I really appreciate your support and the Chainlink support for Sibos. It is an industry event. It's not a SWIFT infomercial, right? It's an important event. We had a great show last year in Beijing. We're looking forward to going to Frankfurt, but we really appreciate your support on that. Actually, I think that's where you and I met, is in a Sibos in Toronto, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
That's right.
That was a while back. Yeah.
Years ago.
Yeah.
I feel like
I love Sibos. Sibos is a fantastic show, and it's such a great gathering of the industry globally and networking events and kind of leaders and thought leaders, and it's really something.
Yeah. I think it's like the biggest financial conference out there. The booths themselves, are really impressive. They're bigger than most people's apartments. They're really next level.
Our Sibos team is world class. It's a real priority for our company to produce that for the industry every year.
I'm actually bringing more people from our marketing team.
Good.
And I'm telling them, look at how they do it, learn how they do it. This is the level we got to get to. This is how you do it.
Can I tell you? So I always go early. I'm actually flying to Frankfurt tomorrow night. Sounds like really early. But one of the things I love is literally 24 hours. And I'm not sure if all kind of main large produced events are like this, but I always go to the floor like 24 hours before the event starts. And you just walk in there and you look around and you go, there's no way in the world this thing's going to be open tomorrow morning. Like it can't happen. I mean, it's just, everybody's kind of buzzing around and fixing things. And there's, all kinds of, contractors and event people and everything in there. And I'd love to go in there. So I'm going to be there on the Friday. I'll probably go on the Saturday. So I'm going to go 48 hours in advance and 24, snap some pictures. But every time I go in there, and this will be my 6th Syboses, from Swift, inside of Swift. I attended before that. But you go in there and just go, yeah, it's not going to happen. There's no way the doors are open at 8 a.m. There's no way it's going to be said. And you walk in the morning and just go, this is amazing. This is beautiful. It's amazing. Everybody's ready to go. Energy's high. So I expect that's going to be the case in Frankfurt again this year as well.
I feel like people want to go to Sybos now. I feel like we're doing.
Yeah, you should all go to Sybos. Everybody should go to
this
Sybos
now. People like, what is this like a Sybos? Is there going to be like a timeshare brochure at the end of this for Sybos? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, the show's really. I joined Swift in beginning of 2020, which is pretty unusual time for everybody, right? And the first one we did was actually the first time we ever had done it online because of the pandemic, and it's really changed a lot. I'd say in the last 3 or 4 years. Of course, there's things that are happening in the industry. Of course, there's updates that need to happen. ISO 2022 migration, that's really important to the industry. There's topics that have to be covered, but shows become much more about innovation, and people show up like, what's happening and how is my bank doing, and related to other banks. What wouldn't I know if I didn't show up here? The speaker quality is fantastic. It's really quite a process to fill the panels, and we're always oversubscribed. These are you're on stage again this year, right? Which is well done, because it's not just a show up and jump on stage. It's a very rigorous process, and we there's a lot of work that goes into producing a high quality event. But it's really changed in the last few years, and really become much more innovation focused. And the two areas that everybody wants to talk about are AI and digital assets. That's it. I mean, those are the top. There's other things that are important. I don't mean that they're not, but in terms of what's on most people's minds and the conversations I have, and maybe it's because I'm the chief innovation officer, that's all they want to talk to me about. But I do get the sense that it really is much more about kind of driving innovation and where this is going, and that's become much more practical and pragmatic. So we're kind of past experimentation. I would say the POC fatigue has kind of set in, and people are looking for really real value now. And how do you take something that worked, that we proved, and how do you find real users? How do we demonstrate the value, and how do we scale these things up?
Yeah, I think now it's time to go live into production, go to scale, really deliver value. I completely agree with you. My first experience with Swift actually was winning an innovation challenge, to your point about innovation, which we won. And then that's the first time I went to Sybos, I think in like 2015 or 16.
Okay.
Was the first one that I went to. And it was a very welcoming community, to your point, and it was very innovation focused. And I agree with you that the percentage of booths, topics, conversations, and just general interest that people have has consistently increased over time on the digital assets dimension.
Yeah.
And I think this year is going to be the most digital asset interest. I personally use Sybos as an event to gauge what the state of the market is.
Yeah, barometer for the market, yeah.
So when I would go to Sybos in previous years, like when the crypto market would be down, there would be years where digital assets were no longer a topic, because someone somewhere lost $50 billion, and the regulators weren't so happy, and the banks were like, oh my God, the regulators aren't happy, so we're not going to say the word digital asset this year. So there were years.
I haven't been involved in any of those conversations, just for... People don't talk about stuff like that, so.
Yeah, so there were years where they were like, it's like a desert, right? I don't think this year is going to be a desert. I think this year is going to be like an oasis of digital asset activity. So what do you see Swift doing for digital assets, for the digital asset community within capital markets and banking, there's this innovation dimension, there's CYBOs. How do you see Swift helping drive the digital asset trend generally?
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously, I think there's no kind of ta-da moment here, right? I mean, we've been doing the experimentation. We've done a number of different things. You've been involved in some of those things. So I think there's been kind of a gradual progression. I think the kind of the intensity and the urgency has been turned up now, right? With some of the changes we talked about in the catalyst in the beginning of this conversation. And so I think it's, we're really trying to figure out which role do we play? How do we play? How can we make the biggest impact? And again, to kind of drive the priorities of our customers, right? And that's one of the things that we've always done with innovation is we kind of do as much research and work, as we can. But then at some point we go, we've taken it far enough. We need to actually work with banks or money managers or groups of users inside of the community to really take it forward. And so, for me, it's kind of stay true to what we have done and the value that we add, and try to figure out how we can step into the digital asset space in a really meaningful way to move beyond, in some cases you can call, 25 billion of tokenized money market funds experiments, right? But there's real volume here now, and there's real momentum, and there's real appetite from our customers. And so what we're trying to determine now is like, what's the best way for us to step into that as kind of the, continued evolution of the work that we've been doing up to now.
Yeah, I agree. I think the work has created a lot of clarity on some of those points. The work with UBS has been good. I think we can absolutely add a few zeros to that 25 billion, and I think the industry will do that. And I think Swift has a big role to play in helping power adding those zeros by getting, the Swift member banks and all their capital on chain, right?
Well, I mean, and it's not, we're well beyond experimentation as well, right? People know that we've been involved with some of the live trials for the digital euro and some of the wholesale cases, right? So these things are happening, right? And we're going to scale, as they scale. But these are live trials. There's real value that's moving back and forth. And there's a pretty high bar to do that. Whether you're doing one transaction or 512 transactions or 1 million transactions, it's a real transaction and they are significant, right? These aren't kind of test trades. So I think we talked about last year about the live trials and our participation in that. That's happening. And again, they're just everywhere you look, there's kind of more and more activity.
Next stage.
Yeah, next stage activity. So
yeah, very excited about that. Excited to be a part of it together with you. Looking forward to taking it, as we've said, to scale. So what do you see as the key remaining pieces that are missing, from the digital asset industry for it to go mainstream? So what still needs to be added for digital assets to go to the next stage of their evolution and growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big one's going to be kind of a common definition around legal settlement. When you settle, it's not just about moving one asset from one, on a blockchain between one wallet and another wallet, right? That whole idea of kind of legal enforceability and confidence in the workflow that you have, again, to do it at scale. I think that's a big one. There's a lot of really good conversations. I was involved in one this morning about, what do we need to have in place? The legal settlement and legal finality, I think is a big one and kind of a common.
The definition of legal finality is still missing.
And the definition's clear. The question is, how is it actually done on a blockchain?
So how does a blockchain, not a probabilistic, but a blockchain transaction meet that with enough confirmation? So how do you meet the definition?
So I'll give you one really concrete example, right? Today, in a centralized utility that does payment settlement and the accounts are moved, it's final. There's an FMI that marks it as final. It's done. If you're moving a digital asset on a blockchain, what if it gets agreed between the parties and then it fails in the validation stage, right? And it actually doesn't get written as a block onto the blockchain. And is there a delay in that? Like, how do you deal with? And there's nothing out there that's an insurmountable problem. There's just things that we need to work through. Some of it's education and awareness, and some of it are just real clarity that we need to be able to do that at scale. So I think legal settlement is a pretty good one. I think there's going to be a lot of work that has to be done with, it's really kind of more opportunistically around workflows, right? Whether that's in pre-validation or that's in compliance checks. It's funny because sometimes when you look at, I would say kind of edge cases for stable coins, maybe in a retail environment, and they say, well, I can move money in a half a second and it costs me a nickel. I mean, that's fantastic, right? I mean, if you're retail and you move from kind of one wallet, whether it's a custodial wallet or not, that's great. But when two financial institutions pay each other, there's a lot more that's needed in that. What if you're paying a sanctioned wallet? That's not legal. You can't do that, right? That stable coin that you're settling, I think USDC settles on 16 different blockchains. Which blockchain is it on? What's the transaction ID? Did you send the travel rule compliance information along with it, right? So it's not just about moving an asset on the chain. Do you have those things? I'll tell you, we have a number, 5 or 6 people that are testing, institutions that are testing on Swift Network, where they're settling the stable coin on chain, and then they send a Swift message to make sure it's compliant. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to do things legally, right? And everybody we talk to wants to do things legally. They all want to be compliant, right? That's not the issue. But now that you have this really nice capability to settle instantly on chain, you still have to be compliant with the law. And everybody wants to do that. So how do you do that, right? Nobody wants to pay a sanctioned wallet. How do you control the token? So there's things like that need to get worked out. I think there's solutions for all of those, but I think those things need to get worked out, again, if you want to kind of get to scale, especially around settling assets on permissionless blockchains.
There are solutions for all those.
Indeed.
We have a very good solution. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It exists.
Yeah.
It's actually called the Chainlink runtime environment. So all those different workflows that you described, you have to synchronize a lot of off-chain data with on-chain events.
Yeah.
And then the problem that you described with legal finality, the way we solve that in the Chainlink world is you have an oracle that does gas bumping and that makes sure that it gets a transaction in. Mm-hmm. So you don't leave it up to the first transaction attempt. So that's one of the things that Chainlink is well known for, is what's called guaranteed execution. So if you put a transaction through Chainlink for data, for cross-chain or something, you get certain guaranteed execution. It might not get in the block you wanted it to get into. So there might be a slight delay. But Chainlink will find all the edge cases and make sure that it does get in, or at least the likelihood that it doesn't get in goes to near zero.
Yeah.
And then those workflows that you described, that's all exactly right. I think the complexity of institutional transactions is just immensely underappreciated. Like all the compliance, books and records, identity, all the different parameters that need to be checked in order for two institutions to send money to each other or transact against an asset purchase or an asset settlement event or a pre-trade event. And all of that is about synchronizing existing system, existing processes, existing data with blockchain events, which I think is exactly the type of great work we're doing together with you.
And you've built that. I mean, there's a progression here, right? And a lot of it has to do with education and awareness, right? That only happens when you have the capability, and you can respond like you do, which is, we've solved for that. You can't underestimate the gap between the real, in some cases, senior decision makers or board members, and actually what's happening. And I don't mean to sound critical here. It's a gap that shouldn't be underestimated, right? And you say, we're going to go ahead and move these flows over. And you might have somebody in a senior position say, well, why do I need a blockchain?
Tom, you can help us.
Right?
You know them.
Yeah.
You'll explain.
When you talk about the hurdles, we're also still in a people business, right? And so when you have these capabilities to say, well, how would that work, and what happens if settlement fails? You've developed that capability. You have a track record of making that work. Now you have to be able to educate people, kind of starting with the people who are overseeing this or doing risk reviews or security reviews, and you have to answer those questions and kind of move up the line. But the gap that we have between the decision makers and the capability, should not be underestimated, in my experience.
I was going to say I see a blog in our future, but aside from that joke, I completely agree with you, and I've been dealing with that gap as you have been for many, many years now. And I think what I've realized is that the efficiency gains of automated compliance, faster settlement times, all those things are attractive, but they're not enough. And the thing that you need is the market demand.
Yep.
And as you and me have discussed, the market demand is now reaching those levels where all of the efficiency people, automated compliance people, everyone who was excited about the efficiency gains of these systems gets to say, see, I told you so, this is way better. And what they'll be talking about is not another efficiency argument. They'll be talking about market demand. So
they'll be talking about the ability to do a payment 24/7, right? In a very kind of efficient, way with liquidity. That's what they're going to be. I mean, that's what people are focused on. I think about that with payments, right? Because we were talking about an example earlier today when we first got started, and somebody was talking about a payment. I said, well, what you actually care about is what you get when you make the payment. And you want that to be really easy. Like I decided I want to subscribe to Anthropic. I just want that to be easy, right? I want to pay I don't want to think about paying for my monthly subscription to Grok. I want Grok to, I don't want to log in and say it's not available, because I didn't pay my subscription. It's like, well, how does that? I don't care about that. What I care about is getting access to Grok. I don't care about the payment. Of course, I care that it's legal and it's fast and it's efficient and it's cheap and like all those things matter. But what you actually care about is what you're buying, not the actual process of buying it, right?
Completely agree. And when Grok is getting paid for in stable coins as the preferred payment method through Swift messages executing initiating the transaction, Chainlink helping execute the transaction on the chain side, I think that's the exciting world.
You're going to set up a conversation with Elon, or how are we going to do this?
I'll tell you after. I'll tell you after. So it's been great chatting with you. Very interesting conversation as always. Thank you for sharing your insights with all of us. Hope you can stick around and meet some of the folks from the team and from the community. It's always a real pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for the great partnership and collaboration. Looking forward to Sybos next week. And, the timeshare brochures are over there for Sybos timeshare. Sybos timeshare is over there in the corner. So it's been a pleasure.
Thanks. My pleasure. Good to see you.
Thank you very much.